option. Alright, now after the rotation is finished, we want the word to disappear. So I'm going to now adjust the out point of that layer to snap to the current time indicator, which is sitting there at 6 seconds. So again, I'm just dragging it and then hold down shift and it'll snap to the current time indicator. So now our little simple animation is coming together. Okay, so the next animation we're going to look at is opacity or transparency. So I'll collapse the rotate layer and lock it, go back to my type tool, click in the window, and we'll do a fade. Again, I'll position that in roughly the center of the screen. And likewise here with this layer, I want it to only to appear at the 6 second mark after the rotation. So I'll just set my time indicator to 6 seconds and then drag the endpoint to snap it to there. Now this is a curious thing. It looks like we can still see both at the same time, but theoretically we shouldn't. Now if I zoom in using the zoom slider at this point, we can see that the rotate layer actually exists for one more frame and is still overlapping here. Even though I snapped it to the time indicator at that point, there seems to be a small glitch here where it hasn't snapped completely. So can't explain that, but all I'm going to do is now unlock the rotate layer and drag holding shift and snap that properly so that we get a true precise cut. Use the zoom slider to zoom back out. That's this control down here. Okay, so now you have the rotate and then you have our fade. Okay, make sure we go back to 6 seconds and just relock rotate. Keeping all the other layers locked is good practice. It means you can't accidentally create keyframes on those layers when you didn't intend to. Select the fade layer and I'm going to open the opacity property, and the hotkey for opacity is T, so it's the only one which doesn't use its first letter, but I remember it as T for transparency. So there's the opacity property. Right now I'm going to click the stopwatch on, which will create a keyframe. The opacity is at 100%. I'm going to leave it at 100 and I'm going to fade this word out over 2 seconds to 0. So now I just need to move my current time indicator to 8 and now slide that down to 0. Here's our fade. And then finally adjust the out point. Now remembering that it doesn't snap properly, just zoom in and snap it. Okay. Alright. Going well. The last one we're going to animate now is the scale property. And as you can imagine, as you've seen from all of these simple transformations we've been animating them all pretty much the same way. And the scale property is no exception. So collapse the fade layer, lock it, go to my type tool, and type in the word scale, back to select tool, move it here, and again it's going to scale from the anchor point. And I'll just position it down here. I'm going to move the endpoint to there, snapping it, and bring up the scale property for the layer, turn animating on, move it to 10 seconds, hit return, and there's different ways I can scale it here. There's two values for X and Y, but the chain, because this constrained proportions is linked on, if I drag on either one, it controls both at the same time and I'll get uniform scale. Okay. So I want to do a non-uniform scale, I can unlock that and then I can scale each X or Y separately. Or I can actually just drag the handles here in the composition window and have a freeform manual scale. In this case, I want to just do a uniform scale like that. And use our scale. Okay, so now at this point it's worth learning a couple of really good keyboard shortcuts. I want to move my time marker exactly back to this keyframe now, and I know it's at 10 seconds, so I could type 10 seconds into my time indicator, but that's a bit laborious. So there's two keyboard shortcuts, the J and the K key. Pressing the K key will move the current time indicator to the next keyframe precisely, and J will move it to the previous keyframe on layers which have keyframes in view. So I can just press the K key now, and you can see that moves it to that keyframe. That's really quick. Now I can just drag this and snap it to there, zooming in, and doing the snap again. And there's my finished animation. The last thing I'm going to do is adjust my work area, because I've only used 10 seconds, and there'll be a large area of white here if I render the whole video or the whole composition. So I'm going to position my keyframe there at my current time indicator at the very end, and then drag the work area bar, which is this grey bar with the yellow handle, and again holding shift will snap it to there. And now I'm ready to render. So to render my composition, I go to the composition, add to render queue, and you can see the timeline now has the render queue added to it. My composition is still back in this tab, the render queue is in this tab. Output module, render settings will leave at best. Output module, click the small button with the triangle on it, choose H264. Now come over here, don't click the triangle button in this case where it says output 2, click the actual yellow writing here, comp1 mp4. This is where you're going to save or render the video file to. In this case I'm just going to render it to the desktop, and I'm going to call it AE Basics Tutorial. Oh. And hit save. Once that's set up, I'll just click render. It will render my video. Okay, that's done. And here's the video. Now, that looks good. On fast movement, we can see a little bit of strobing, and there's a way to make it look smoother, and that's using motion blur. So what I can actually do now is I'll just go back to my comp 1 here, and I'm going to turn motion blur on for all of the layers. And I do that by finding this button on the timeline, motion blur. Firstly, I'll collapse them all and unlock them all, and just turn all of these on for each layer. And then I'm going to go add it to the render queue again, set up those settings again, H264 here, and I'll call it, I'll put MB, save, render. And now we'll get a shutter effect which should make the motion feel a little more natural and filmic. And here's our finished product. It's a bit there. Okay, so that's the basics of After Effects, setting up a composition, creating text layers, and animating basic properties with keyframes.